Hi, my name is Octavia, and on Christmas Eve, in front of 20 people, my dad looked me dead in the eye and said, "Pay rent or get out." My sister raised her glass, smiled, and said, "Good luck with that." No one stood up for me, no one even blinked, so I packed my things, left without a word, and cut every single tie. But what if that moment wasn't the beginning? What if they'd been preparing my exit long before I ever stepped out the door? A deleted scholarship, a stolen savings account, a credit card opened in my name, and a family that smiled while they erased me. Do you ever wonder what it feels like to be needed, only when you're useful? Let me tell you how I became invisible, and what happened when I finally refused to disappear. I had only been in the room for 5 minutes. 5 minutes of pretending to laugh along with my sister's colleagues, of juggling a tray of roasted vegetables I'd cooked myself while no one noticed, of smiling at people who forgot my name year after year. The house was glowing with tinsel, strings of multicolored lights wrapped around every doorway like the ghosts of good intentions. The fireplace crackled like it was trying too hard to keep the cheer alive. Holiday music played softly in the background. Bing Crosby or Dean Martin, something nostalgic. I placed the tray on the crowded dining table and stepped back. Dad was mid-conversation with a couple from church, his voice louder than the music. I heard him laugh. That full-bodied laugh he only saved for Vera. "She just got promoted, director of brand partnerships, big-time stuff," he boomed, giving her a mock salute. Vera grinned like she'd been waiting all night for him to say it. I stood next to the buffet, hands clasped in front of me, nodding at a passing neighbor who probably thought I was hired help. I was invisible, but not in the shy, demure way, in the way you forget the coat rack is there until you stub your toe on it. Dinner passed in a blur of overcooked ham, forced laughter, and an extra bottle of red opened for Vera's success. I sipped sparkling water because no one remembered I stopped drinking. Or maybe they didn't ask. And then, as I started to gather plates, because someone had to, my father stood. "You're 31, Octavia." I froze. He wasn't even looking at me when he said it. He was speaking to the whole room. "Time to pay rent or get out. This house isn't a charity." The air thinned. Someone's fork clinked against a plate, and Vera took a long, deliberate sip of her wine. No one laughed. Not yet. They were all waiting to see if he was joking, but I knew he wasn't. He never joked when it came to money. Every head turned to me, like I was the punchline to a joke they hadn't been told. My mouth went dry. The only sound in the room was the crackle from the fireplace, which suddenly felt more like a threat than a comfort. I opened my mouth, but before I could say anything, Vera leaned back in her chair, crossed one leg over the other, and let out the most delicate scoff I'd ever heard. "Good luck with that," she said. That's when the laughter came. Light at first, uneasy, then more of it, from the neighbors, from the cousins, from people who didn't know me but knew it was safe to laugh when Vera did. I stood still, my hands gripping the edge of the tablecloth. My plate was in front of me, untouched. I hadn't even made it halfway through dinner. I stared at my father, the man who used to write notes in my lunchbox when I was in 5th grade. I stared at Vera, who used to cry when I wouldn't play Barbies with her, then grew up into someone who could twist a knife with a smile. I didn't say a word. Instead, I picked up my plate, walked into the kitchen, and gently slid it into the sink. I turned off the faucet, wiped my hands on a towel, and reached for my coat from the hook behind the door. I didn't look at anyone as I walked back into the living room. "That was overdue," Vera whispered as I passed her. Her voice was soft, but carried. I paused for half a second, looked at her, then kept walking. No one stopped me. No one followed. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing in the warmth, the laughter, the performance. The cold outside was honest, sharp. It told the truth. My hands were shaking, but not from the chill. It was something else, something old and quiet that had lived inside me for years. Humiliation mixed with resolve, the kind that doesn't shout. The kind that builds until there's no room left for pretending. I walked to my car, parked 2 blocks down because Vera's friends had taken every spot on the street. The neighborhood was lit up with inflatable Santas and projected snowflakes dancing on garage doors. It all looked so fake now. As I sat behind the wheel, I checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts, just a notification glowing at the top of the screen. Smart lock, home secured. The key icon was lit. I'd activated it earlier that afternoon, just in case. I started the engine, let it idle. My reflection in the rearview mirror didn't flinch. Not this time, not again, never again. I pulled away from the curb, one last glance at the house that had never truly been mine. I wasn't sure where I was going emotionally, but physically, I was heading to the place I bought without telling anyone, the place with my name on the deed. The place with a porch light I could leave on or off, not because someone demanded it, but because I decided. As I made the first turn, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't curse the people inside. I just drove, because sometimes leaving doesn't look like slamming a door or delivering a final speech. Sometimes it's just a woman quietly deciding she's done letting everyone else write her story. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my new place, the sky was already starting to lighten. That strange pre-dawn glow hovered above the snow-covered rooftops like a held breath. I sat in the car a moment longer than I needed to, letting the engine idle while I gathered my thoughts. Or maybe the courage to open a front door that was finally, entirely mine. There were no lights on in the house. I hadn't left anything on when I'd left earlier that evening. I didn't expect to come back so soon. But here I was, less than 10 hours after the Christmas party that turned into a public tribunal. The air inside my car was heavy with silence, but for once, it didn't feel like judgment. It felt like release. I grabbed the tote bag from the passenger seat, the only thing I'd brought with me from the party, and stepped out into the biting Wisconsin morning. My boots crunched against the icy gravel. My breath came in clouds. Every movement felt sharper in the cold. Unlocking the front door, I walked into a home that still smelled faintly of fresh paint and clean wood. I hadn't even unpacked the kitchen yet, but the coffee maker sat on the counter like a promise. I dropped my bag on the couch, pulled off my coat, and set the kettle on. The quiet wrapped around me like a blanket. No clanging dishes, no raised voices, no footsteps overhead, just me, just space. I poured myself a cup and sat by the window, watching the snowflakes fall against the soft orange glow of a nearby street lamp. I should have been crying. A younger version of me might have. But the tears had dried up long before last night's dinner rolls hit the table. Instead, I found myself drifting back, not to the yelling, not to Vera's smirk or Dad's thunderous voice, but to all the other times they tried to tell me I didn't belong without ever saying it out loud. The bathroom chair. That was always my seat. Every holiday, every birthday, every family event. It didn't matter how early I arrived or how much I helped in the kitchen. By the time we sat down, the only seat left was the one nearest the bathroom door. People would constantly brush past me, apologize as they squeezed through to wash their hands or freshen up. It was the worst place to sit, and yet somehow always mine. Vera, of course, always got the seat next to Dad, center of the table, center of attention. She'd tell stories, laugh loudly, refill wine glasses like she was playing hostess at a gala instead of Christmas dinner. And I smiled politely, passed dishes, nodded along, and disappeared. They never said it, never outright claimed she mattered more. But if you looked, really looked, the math was simple. And then there was my name, or the many versions of it they managed to get wrong over the years. Octavie on the family reunion shirts. Octa on a Thanksgiving place card. Madison on last year's Christmas gift tag, which wasn't even close. At first I thought it was carelessness, then I thought maybe it was just a mistake, but eventually it felt like something else, a slow, repeated erasure. Like even my name was too much trouble to remember, too much effort to get right, not worthy of the time it took to double-check. This year's card, the one Vera designed, read, "Happy Holidays from Harland, Vera, and family." No mention of me, not even an "and Octavia." I wasn't family. I was "and family." I sipped my coffee, the ceramic warm against my fingers, and felt something strange settle inside me. Not rage, not grief, just confirmation. Proof that last night wasn't an outburst. It was a crescendo. The engagement party came to mind. Vera's, last spring. She had rented out a rustic barn turned event space in Door County. Fairy lights, a live string quartet, signature cocktails, the works. I'd worn a navy dress I'd bought on sale and stood in the back most of the evening, smiled, took pictures, poured wine. At some point, someone dimmed the lights and a slideshow began. Childhood photos, family trips, high school dances. There was a picture of us at the lake. Dad, Vera, her fiancé, and me, except in the projected image I was missing. Cropped out, like I'd never been there at all. I remember blinking at the screen, confused. It was my arm still visible on the edge, my hair in the corner. Just enough to know I had been there, but not enough to be remembered. The applause had been deafening. People clapped for the memories, for the romance, for the perfectly filtered story. No one noticed the missing parts. I stood up from the couch and walked to the kitchen, refilled my mug. The clock on the microwave blinked 7:03. Still early, too early for calls or explanations. I checked my phone anyway. No missed calls, no unread messages, not even a stray group chat notification. Just silence. Because that's the thing about people like my father. They don't apologize. They don't admit wrongdoing. They wait for you to come crawling back, for the dust to settle, and when you don't, when you stay away, they say things like, "Well, she always was the dramatic one," or "She just needed space," or worse, they pretend you were never part of it to begin with. I had spent years learning to decode their silence. Now, I was learning how to speak it back. I carried my mug to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and let the steam rise into the air. There was something therapeutic about the way the light hit the mirror, soft and cold. I looked at myself, really looked. No makeup, hair still in a loose bun, eyes a little tired but focused. There were no tears, no visible cracks, just a woman with a line drawn in the snow. "Who am I?" I whispered, "when I'm not the one they forget?" I didn't have the full answer yet, but for the first time, I was willing to find out. I didn't sleep much. The kind of tired I felt wasn't the kind that a few hours under a weighted blanket could fix. It was a bone-deep weariness, the kind you carry around for years without realizing how heavy it's become until you finally put it down. I'd done that last night, in a way, closed a door, chose myself. The morning light was soft, drifting in through the half-closed blinds in streaks of silver across my kitchen floor. I sat at the table, still in my hoodie and socks, a cup of coffee going lukewarm in my hand. The quiet in this house was different from the silence I grew up with. This quiet didn't require me to tiptoe or hold my breath. I flipped open my laptop, blinking past the brightness of the screen. No social media tabs this time, no checking Vera's Instagram to see what narrative she was spinning today. This was business. My business. Time to transfer accounts, cancel utilities, reroute mail. I needed to erase my digital fingerprints from that house like I was never there. It was during that admin whirlwind that I opened my bank app. Habit more than anything. But the moment I saw it, line after line of transfers labeled rent, home, going back nearly 4 years, my stomach tightened. I clicked into one of the transactions. It was clean. My name, the amount, his account, but something about it nagged at me. I had asked him once, maybe 2 years ago, if I should just pay the mortgage company directly, make it simpler. "Don't overcomplicate it," Dad had said, chuckling as if I was the fussy one. At the time, I let it go. I always let things go. But now, with distance between us, physical, emotional, legal, the dots started to connect. I pulled up the mortgage company's website, dug out the property info, and dialed the customer service line. The hold music was an outdated piano melody that repeated every 40 seconds. I waited, drummed my fingers, checked my coffee, waited some more. When a rep finally answered, I explained that I'd recently moved out of the property at that address and wanted to update my contact information. I gave my name. She paused. "Ma'am, you're not listed as an account holder, but—" I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "That account's been delinquent for the last 3 months. I said nothing. 3 months. I'd been sending $100 a month to my father, thinking I was covering half the mortgage. Instead, he hadn't paid the bank a cent. The money had gone. Where? Into his pocket? Vera's vacation fund? the same pool they dipped into for catered Christmas dinners and new patio furniture. I thanked the woman, hung up, and stared at my screen. I wasn't angry. Not right away. That came later. What I felt in that moment was embarrassment. I'd been the one paying, cooking, cleaning, and still being treated like a freeloader. They'd weaponized the idea of debt, not just financial, but emotional. We took you in. You had nowhere else to go. As if I hadn't been contributing from day one. As if they'd done me a favor by letting me stay in the house I partially funded. I pulled up my transaction history and started downloading PDFs. One by one, month by month, all of it, labeled and dated. I created a new folder on my desktop and named it, deliberately, Receipts. This wasn't about revenge, not yet. This was about having proof, because people like my father didn't believe in apologies. They believed in stories, versions of the truth they could tell others over dinner, polished and edited until you sounded like the problem. Vera was good at that, too. She had given me a look once when I asked about those payments, like she knew I wouldn't push, like she was daring me to. And I didn't. That was on me. I kept going, canceling old accounts, redirecting mail. I was almost done when I opened our shared family photo album. Digital, of course, managed by Vera, updated after every holiday or event. I wasn't planning to look through it, just needed to unlink my access. But I hesitated. Curiosity got the better of me. I scrolled through the Thanksgiving folder from 2 years ago. There it was, the group photo in the dining room, taken just before dinner. Dad at the head of the table, Vera next to him, my stepmom, a few cousins. My arm. Just my arm. They had cropped the image. I remembered that day. I'd been the one who set the table, who stayed up late the night before making 3 pies because Vera insisted store-bought was tacky. I'd worn a blouse for once. Put on mascara. I stood right next to Vera in the original picture, smiling, present. But in this version, I was gone, deleted. The comments were all hearts and compliments. Beautiful family. So perfect. No one noticed the missing person. No one missed her. I sat back in my chair, my breath catching in my throat. Not from pain exactly, but from recognition. This was a pattern, not a glitch, and I was done being cropped out. I renamed the folder on my desktop. Rent fraud, emotional gaslight identity, erasure. I printed the first 10 pages of bank statements, clipped them together. They felt heavier than they should have. I added them to a folder, not just digital now, but physical, something I could hold, hand to a lawyer if I had to. I walked into the hallway, toward the small mirror by the coat rack. Taped to the corner was a photo of my mother. She'd been gone a long time, but I kept that photo with me through every move, every messy chapter. I looked at her face. Her eyes, mine, really, stared back like she knew exactly what I was about to do. You didn't raise me to disappear, I whispered, and I meant it. By the time I finished printing the last page of statements and laid the final folder on the desk, the clock on my laptop read 7:48 a.m. It was the day after Christmas. The world outside still looked frozen, wrapped in a false peace. But inside, something was finally moving. I took a long sip of coffee, now lukewarm, and stared at the windowsill. The candle sat there, untouched, still in the cheap plastic wrap, clearance tag glaring back at me. $2.99. It was the only thing I brought back from the party. No gift tag, no note, no care, just a clearance bin left over passed off as a gesture. The kind of thing someone grabs at the last minute, not because they forgot, but because they didn't care to remember. I hadn't thought about it much the night before, not in the whirlwind of everything else. The shouting, the stares, the humiliation. But now, in the sobering light of morning, that little candle stared back at me like a punchline I was finally getting. I reached for my phone to check the time again, and that's when I saw the email. Subject line, urgent credit alert, new account opened. I blinked, tapping it open. It was from a credit monitoring service I'd signed up for years ago and completely forgotten about. The email detailed a new department store card opened in my name. The address? Harland Ruel's house. My old address. I froze. Scrolling down, I saw the timestamp. Not from yesterday, not last week, but months ago. The most recent charge was from 2 days before Christmas. 289.72 at a high-end beauty retailer. Products I would never use. My stomach dropped. I opened my browser and logged into the credit reporting site. One search confirmed it. Not one, but 2 cards had been opened using my name and social security number. One at a home goods store, another at a department store. The addresses matched the family house. The purchase history, designer heels, a Vitamix, an $800 hairdryer. I didn't need to guess who had them. The name on the most recent shipping confirmation was listed plainly, Vera Calloway. There it was. Not just betrayal, not just cruelty, theft. This wasn't someone forgetting to include me in a group photo or mispronouncing my name at a party. This was criminal. This was identity fraud. From my own sister. I stood up from the chair slowly, the floorboards creaking beneath me. My heart pounded like it was trying to get out, to run from the realization I didn't want, but couldn't ignore. My sister had stolen from me, and she wasn't even clever about it. I walked to the windowsill and picked up the candle again, turned it in my hands. Clearance sticker still intact, like an insult carved in price tag glue. This was my Christmas gift, while she was using my name to buy luxury appliances and blowouts for parties I wasn't invited to. I held the candle, stared at it for a long moment, then carried it to the kitchen trash and dropped it in without ceremony. No more souvenirs from people who treated me like garbage. I returned to my desk, opened a new message, and typed without hesitation. 2. Vera Calloway. Subject: Final notice. I'm closing every account and shutting down every connection tied to me. If any charges show up in my name from this day forward, I report them. To the bank, to the police, and to the lawyer I've already spoken to. I hit send. No emotion, no drama. Just fact. A minute later, the read receipt popped up. Seen 8:06 a.m. No reply. But it didn't matter. She didn't need to answer. She knew exactly what she had done. My phone rang 5 minutes later. Dad. I stared at the screen, let it vibrate twice, then pressed decline. The silence was heavier than the ringtone. I turned back to my laptop, opened my bank app, and started making calls. I called the bank first, then the electric company, then the internet provider. One by one, I removed my name from every joint account, every billing profile, every auto-pay I had set up for their convenience. No more paying the Wi-Fi bill they all used while mocking me at dinner. No more handling the car insurance tied to a vehicle Vera hadn't paid a dime for. No more utilities under my name because it's just easier this way. I was done making life easier for people who made mine unbearable. It took nearly an hour, but I cleared everything, every account, every trace. My inbox filled with confirmation emails like small, quiet victories. Then the group chat lit up. Vera. Wi-Fi's down. Fix it, please. I stared at the message. For a moment, I hovered over the keyboard, then typed, You said I should handle my own life. I'm doing exactly that. Hit send. There was no response, no thanks, no sorry, just more silence. Good. Let them sit with it. I leaned back in my chair, the house still quiet, sunlight creeping in across the floor. I wasn't unraveling. I was recalculating. For years, I'd been told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too complicated. But maybe they said that because it was easier than admitting what they were. Entitled, manipulative, selfish. They wanted a version of me that gave endlessly and asked for nothing. What they got instead was me. By mid-morning, the sun had crept halfway up the back wall of my kitchen, casting a pale winter light across the floor tiles. I sat quietly, watching dust motes drift in the light like slow-moving reminders of all the things I used to ignore. The glow didn't warm the room much, but it was enough to keep me still, calm, almost peaceful. I hadn't felt that in years. Then the screen on my phone lit up again. Another missed call from Dad, no voicemail. Just his name in bold, staring at me like it had something to say. I let it fade without touching it, the same way you let a conversation die when you know the apology isn't coming, because it never did and it never would. I pushed my phone face down on the table and leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch a little longer. It was mine now, and I wasn't giving it up. My mind drifted back to the night of the Christmas party, the moment after I'd closed that door, when the cold hit me like a slap, but felt more honest than anything I'd heard at that table. I hadn't cried then, not in the car, not when I pulled away from the curb, not even when I passed the grocery store I used to stop at every week to pick up the brand of coffee Dad liked, even though he never noticed. I drove straight home. No music, no radio, just the hum of the tires against icy pavement and the occasional thought trying to convince me to turn around, to go back, to not make this a thing. But I knew better. I'd known better for a long time. When I pulled into my driveway that night, the snow was still fresh, undisturbed. I turned off the engine, sat in the dark for a moment, then reached for the envelope taped under the passenger seat. The deed. Signed. Sealed. Mine. I unlocked the door to my new home without fanfare. No grand gestures, no symbolic key-turn moment, just me and the soft click of independence. Inside, it was quiet, unfurnished, but not empty. The boxes I'd stacked during the last few weeks were right where I'd left them. I'd been preparing for this, not consciously at first, but somewhere deep down, I'd known I needed an escape plan. I walked through the hallway, passing the bare walls, and into the bedroom. The sheets were still sealed in plastic on top of the mattress. I pulled them off, made the bed slowly, methodically, like I was claiming something sacred. Then I went back out to the car, box by box, bag by bag. I carried it all in: clothes, documents, books, the cheap lamp from my old room, the one nobody else ever touched. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I left the candle behind, not out of spite, just clarity. When I finally collapsed onto the mattress, it was well past midnight. My body ached, not from labor, but from release, like shedding a second skin that had grown too tight to breathe in. I stared at the ceiling and let the quiet hum of my own space lull me to sleep. Now, 2 days later, I was finishing what I'd started, the last ties. I picked up my phone again and dialed the gas company. Yes, I'd like to remove my name from the billing account ending in 7328, effective immediately. Next was the water, then trash collection, streaming services, car insurance, every piece I had once taken on to make things easier, now, one by one, cut loose. When I hit the Netflix account, I paused. The profile icon Vera used was still labeled Queen V. I stared at it for a second, hovered over the delete button. Click, gone. It wasn't about the streaming account. It was about every tiny way I'd been conditioned to give, to soften, to play along. This was me choosing the opposite. Not to be cruel, just to be clear. Then came the email. Subject, final notice. All accounts closed. No greeting, no signature, just one line. Any further use of my name will be met with legal action. I attached a PDF, receipts, screenshots, fraud alerts, not accusations, just facts. I sent it to Vera, CC'd Dad. No drama, no threats, just information. 20 minutes later, Vera posted on Facebook. Some people forget who raised them the second they get a little money. Wild. I took a screenshot, saved it in my gaslight attempts folder. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't hitch. I didn't write back. A few comments trickled under her post. Sympathy. Thinly veiled judgment, people who knew just enough to guess, and just enough to be wrong. But I wasn't playing the game anymore. I didn't owe them a correction. Then the phone rang again. Dad. I let it ring twice, then hit decline. This time, I didn't stare at the screen. I opened a new message, typed slowly, carefully. This time, you'll hear me through silence. Send. I didn't expect that to change anything, but it didn't need to. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about me, drawing lines not in sand, but in stone. Lines that couldn't be rubbed out with a fake apology or a last-minute gift. They'd always said I was too sensitive. Maybe I was, but now I felt everything. And I wasn't looking away anymore. The morning after I hit send on the legal notice, I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes after you've made a decision you can't undo and don't want to. There wasn't relief. It wasn't pride either. It was something cooler, sharper, like stepping outside in December without flinching. I made coffee without checking my phone. I knew there'd be missed calls. I knew the silence on their end wouldn't last. It never did. The thing about people like Vera and Harland was they didn't know what to do when the person they used to control stopped responding. It was like cutting the strings off a puppet show mid-performance. The audience gets restless when the characters fall still. By the time I sat down at my desk, the phone had already buzzed 3 times. Harland, no voicemail, just those 3 rings like some kind of ritual. I didn't answer, not because I was being petty, but because there was nothing left to say. He'd used up his words a long time ago. Minutes later, a voicemail from Vera came through. Her voice was tight, clipped. "You've made your point, Octavia. Okay? It's not funny anymore. Enough already." I listened to the message once, then tapped the screen to screenshot it, saving it into the new folder I'd made on my desktop. Gaslight Archive. Another exhibit for the files. I turned back to my laptop and opened a blank spreadsheet. 1 tab at a time, I began compiling. Every transfer I'd made to Harlan's account. Every bill I'd paid that wasn't mine. Every holiday message they'd forgot to include me in. Every screenshot, every voicemail transcript, every photo where I'd been cropped out or not tagged or reduced to a ghost in the corner. I printed them, hole-punched them, sorted them into tabs labeled theft, fraud, defamation, emotional exploitation. It felt like building a case for someone else, like I was finally the lawyer I'd needed all those years, only this time the courtroom was mine. I was halfway through organizing when the knock came at the door. Not aggressive, not tentative, just calm. When I opened it, Aunt Deborah stood there. Long coat, wool scarf, eyes a little red like she'd either been crying or hadn't slept much. We hadn't spoken since Mom's funeral. She didn't ask to come in, didn't offer tea or small talk. Just handed me a small USB drive in a white envelope and said, "Your mother would be proud. You're not wrong." That was it. Then she left. No goodbyes. No guilt-tripping, just truth, dropped off like a gift. I stood in the doorway a moment longer, unsure what to do with the weight in my chest. It wasn't pain, it was recognition. Finally, someone had seen it, had seen me, and not just now, but all along. I closed the door gently and walked back to the desk, inserted the USB drive and waited. A single video file loaded. I clicked play. It was footage from Vera's engagement party, taken by someone's phone, not the official camera. You could hear music in the background, people laughing. Vera was seated at a table with Harland and a few others. Someone off-screen asked, "You gonna make Octavia one of your bridesmaids?" Vera rolled her eyes and chuckled. "Octavia? She's not really part of that. She's more like the emergency fund. You know, the backup bank account. We keep her close, just in case." Laughter. Harland included. He clinked his glass to hers and said, "She doesn't mind. She's always been helpful." I stared at the screen long after the clip ended. They didn't even hesitate. That was the worst part. It wasn't a joke that slipped out. It was a worldview. Something they believed, said aloud without fear of correction, because no one there disagreed. I sat back, stared at the ceiling, and let the silence settle. Then I opened a new document. Not a manifesto. Not a threat. Just a letter, addressed to the family lawyer. I outlined everything, the financial misuse, the identity theft, the emotional manipulation. I included the file names, the dates, the attached documents. I stated my intent to formally sever all remaining ties, financial and otherwise, and asked for assistance in updating my legal records to reflect my full independence. No lawsuit, yet. But I wasn't bluffing either. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about accuracy, about drawing clean lines so no one could claim confusion later. I reviewed the letter 3 times, checking the tone. It was firm, clear, emotionally restrained. Then I printed it, signed it, scanned it back into a PDF. Before I could hesitate, I hit send. And just like that, it was done. No fireworks. No tears. Just action. Like brushing lint off your coat and realizing you finally noticed what doesn't belong. The phone sat silent for most of the day. Late in the afternoon, a text came through from Harland. "Let's talk before this gets any uglier." I stared at the screen for a full minute, then archived the message without responding. They wanted silence. I gave them records. They wanted control. I gave them law. It was strange how quickly the weight shifted once I hit send. Not lighter, not heavier, just different. More like putting down a burden, only to realize there's another waiting for you in the next room. Except this one, I was ready for. That afternoon, I drove across town to a small branch of the bank where my parents had opened a custodial account for me when I was 17. I hadn't thought about it in years. Not since college, not since Mom died. But something in me couldn't shake the feeling that the final missing piece was buried there. I walked in and gave my name to the teller. She smiled politely and tapped on her keyboard, her tone sweet and distant, like someone reading off a restaurant wait list. After a minute, her eyes narrowed. She asked me to sit. Then, a man in a blue button-up shirt with a senior advisor name badge waved me into his office. "You're Octavia Ruel?" he asked, though he already knew. "Yes, I'm here to get clarity on a custodial account that was opened under my name years ago." He nodded, tapping into his system. "It looks like it was opened in 2008. You would have been 18? I nodded again. He kept scrolling, then frowned. "The account was active for about 5 years, but it's been at a zero balance since late 2013. I leaned forward. "Can you tell me what happened? Where it went?" He hesitated. There were multiple withdrawals starting in 2011, all marked as household needs or shared expenses. No red flags in the system, because the custodian on the account had full authority to withdraw. I swallowed the sour taste in my mouth. That would have been my father. "I'm sorry. The total withdrawn over the span of those 2 years was $7,248.57. I blinked. That money had been saved since I was a kid. Birthday checks from Grandma. A few part-time jobs I worked in high school. College graduation gifts, and it was gone before I ever even knew it had been touched. Not spent on books or tuition, not on me, but on the house. On them. "Can I get a printout of the activity?" I asked, my voice steady. "Of course." As he clicked the printer, I remembered all the times Dad would talk about how lucky I was to have a roof over my head, to not worry about bills. I thought he was being proud. Turns out he was being literal, and using my money to do it. The printout was warm in my hands, the ink still fresh. I folded it neatly and slid it into my tote bag next to the file marked "Fraud Confirmed." When I got back home, the mailbox was full. A few end-of-year sales flyers, a water bill, and a single cream-colored envelope with no return address. Handwritten, familiar. Inside was a card. "You'll always have a place here. Just remember who gave you a roof when no one else did." No signature, but I didn't need one. It was the kind of guilt-wrapped gift only one person could have sent, Denise. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable I could have written it myself. The timing, the wording, the passive-aggressive saint complex wrapped in flowery handwriting. I wanted to rip it up. Instead, I walked to the kitchen drawer, opened the folder labeled "Emotional Blackmail," and added it. Then I sat down at my desk and stared at my phone. I scrolled through my messages, reread the text from Harland I'd ignored. "Let's talk before this gets any uglier." Too late. It was already ugly. It had been ugly for years. Only now I had the paperwork to prove it. I thought about texting back. Instead, I got in my car. The drive to their house was automatic. I could have done it in my sleep. Same cracked driveway, same wind chimes clinking against the porch, the same Christmas wreath still hanging on the door like nothing had happened. I didn't knock. I walked in. They were in the kitchen. Vera leaned against the counter, scrolling on her phone. Harland sat at the table, a half-finished sandwich in front of him. Denise was at the stove, stirring something that smelled like pot roast. Nobody spoke when they saw me. I pulled out 3 envelopes from my bag and placed them on the table, one in front of each of them. Inside each was the same thing, Screenshots, credit reports, bank statements, the video from the engagement party, the letter from the lawyer, every receipt, every lie, documented. If I receive one more charge, text, or implication, I said quietly, I will make this public. Police, court, media, your choice. But this ends here. Harland looked like he'd been slapped but said nothing. Vera scoffed. You're just bitter because no one catered to your endless drama. I met her gaze. You stole from me. You used me. You laughed about it on camera. God, Octavia. You always make everything about you. Denise stepped forward with a wounded look, arms out like she might try to hug me. I stepped back. No more hugs from people who steal. She froze, then lowered her arms, lips parting like she wanted to cry but didn't have the right tears. I turned and walked out. No screaming. No dramatics. Just a door opening and closing. One last time. The walk down the driveway was quiet. I glanced at the garden beds I used to weed for them every spring. At the porch, I painted one summer because Harlan said we couldn't afford contractors. At the window where Mom once stood with a coffee in hand, waving me off to school, full circle. Only this time, no bags, no guilt, no looking back. When I got home, the sun had just dipped below the horizon. I changed into sweatpants, poured a glass of water, and walked over to the storage box in the corner. Inside was the candle, the same one they gave me at the Christmas party. Clearance bin. $2.99. I lit it, let it burn for a while, then blew it out and placed it in a new file box. Label on top. Evidence. Just in case. After dropping the candle into the evidence box and sliding the lid shut, I sat still for a long time, watching the flame inside me burn quieter, but not out. The house was hushed, wrapped in the kind of winter stillness that only comes in the deep hours of morning, when even the neighbors' wind chimes have given up on moving. It was December 30th, almost the new year. I reached for one of the last unopened boxes I'd stacked in the far corner of the attic when I moved in. I hadn't touched it since. It had no label. Just a thin layer of dust and a faded piece of tape holding the lid down. Something about it made me pause. I dragged the box closer, setting it near the window where the light from the street lamp cast a faint golden glow. I peeled the tape slowly. Inside were old school awards, yearbooks, a dried corsage from junior prom, and beneath that, envelopes. Tucked between a folder of college brochures and a faded copy of my high school diploma was a sealed manila envelope. My name was scribbled in black ink on the front. The handwriting was Harlan's, sharp, rushed. I opened it. Inside was a letter from a university in Chicago, a full-ride scholarship offer, tuition, books, housing, all of it. The postmark, April 2016. The acceptance deadline had passed months before I ever even knew it existed. On the back of the letter, written in my father's handwriting, were the words, "We can't let her leave. She's too important here." My breath caught in my throat. Too important? To cook? To babysit Vera's kids on weekends? To cover the electric bill when his pension fell short? To be the emotional punching bag when Denise felt small? 7 years. That was the cost of his need to control. 7 years of my life rerouted because someone decided I was more useful silent and nearby than educated and independent. I stood, clutching the letter in both hands, the edges trembling between my fingers. I felt every second I'd wasted in that house, every slammed door, every ignored accomplishment, every time I bit my tongue while they smiled for the neighbors. And then, in the very same box, something else caught my eye. A small envelope. This one was different, delicate, pale pink, slightly creased at the edges, and in the middle, written in familiar cursive that made my chest tighten immediately, were the words, "To my Octavia, open when they make you doubt your shine." I didn't breathe as I opened it. Inside was a folded piece of stationery, the ink faded slightly but still legible. If they ever make you feel like you're too much, remember, they weren't enough to hold you. There was no signature. It didn't need one. My mother had written it. Tucked behind the note was a savings bond certificate, matured, issued just 6 months before her diagnosis. I ran my thumb over the corner, blinking back tears that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with clarity. This is what I had used to buy my house. She'd made sure I had something. Even if Harland had taken the rest, she'd left me a piece of freedom he couldn't touch. I pressed the note to my heart, whispered a soft, cracked, "Thank you." It was time. I returned downstairs, opened my laptop, and began writing. Not another legal letter, not another boundary-setting email, a post, for everyone. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. I typed slowly, carefully, like each word was a piece of brickwork in the foundation I was finally building under myself. Family is not who laughs loudest in the crowd, but who remembers to keep your name whole when you're not in the room. You can love people and still walk away. You can forgive and still say, "That doesn't belong in my life anymore." I don't owe my silence to people who used my stillness as a stage. I clicked post, and then I walked away from the screen. An hour later, I returned. 300 likes, dozens of comments, people I hadn't heard from in years, old teachers, coworkers, even Vera's ex, all quietly, respectfully reaching out. "I saw you back then. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. You always deserved better." None of it changed what happened, but it softened something inside me. It reminded me I hadn't been entirely invisible, just misrepresented. By mid-afternoon, I opened my legal folder one last time and attached the final documents to an email addressed to the family attorney. Subject: Account Terminations Title. Severance. I reviewed the PDFs, clean, concise, final. Then I hit send. No drama, no more rehearsing explanations in my head. It was done. That evening, I checked Vera's social media. Her profile was silent. Harlan's account? Gone. No dramatic exit, no public statements, just a digital void where the noise used to be. And it was enough. They didn't apologize, but they stopped pretending. And that, in its own way, was the most honest thing they'd ever done. Later that night, I drove to the lakeshore. The wind was harsh, but I welcomed it. I parked the car, walked to the bench Mom used to sit on, and pulled the note from my coat pocket. The one she wrote. I read it again. "If they ever make you feel like you're too much." I smiled. They did. For years. But now they didn't get to define what too much meant anymore. I lit a match and held the edge of the paper over the flame. The note curled, blackened, then vanished, piece by piece, into the wind. Not out of hate, but out of thanks. As the last ember floated away, I whispered, "I'm not staying angry. I'm just not staying." The first morning of January broke softly, not with trumpets or fanfare, but with quiet, a kind of sacred silence that blanketed everything outside my window. The snowfall had come overnight, erasing the messy footprints of the day before. Milwaukee felt untouched, like the city itself was trying to reset. Inside my house, everything was still. No buzzing phone, no messages waiting to be answered. Just the smell of fresh coffee and the low hum of the radiator. I sat at the kitchen table wrapped in my favorite cardigan, a pen in one hand and a blank journal in front of me. No resolutions, no New Year, New Me declarations. Just space, breath, stillness. It was the first time in a long while that I didn't wake up waiting for the other shoe to drop. I thought about all the things I could have said to my family. "You lied. You used me. You made me feel invisible." But I hadn't said them, not because I didn't want to, but because, for once, I didn't need to be understood by people who never wanted to know me in the first place. They'd built their version of me, dramatic, fragile, overly emotional. That caricature made it easier for them to justify how they treated me. It made them feel good, but it wasn't my job anymore to correct them. I flipped open the journal and wrote 3 words at the top of the page. I release you, not as a gift to them, as a promise to myself. After finishing my coffee, I checked my phone once, more out of habit than hope. No texts, no apologies, no surprise. And still, I didn't feel the sting I used to. There was no ache, just confirmation that I'd been right to walk away. It's funny how silence used to feel like punishment. Now it felt like protection. I walked back to my office and opened the drawer where I kept my letters, the real ones. Not emails, not screenshots, ink on paper history. Among them was the letter I'd written to my younger self months ago but hadn't yet finished. Today, I added the final lines. You were never broken, just hidden, and now you're home. I folded the letter, placed it in a small envelope, and took it to the fireplace. It wasn't a dramatic burning. I lit it quietly, watched the edges curl and lift into the air. There was no grief this time, just gratitude. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant freeing up space. Later that morning, I passed the corner store and overheard two women talking near the checkout. Did you hear about Harlan's place going up for sale? One said, leaning in. Oh yeah. And Vera? Word is she's being investigated. Something with credit cards and misuse of accounts. Their voices trailed off as I walked past. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I didn't feel triumphant. That wasn't the point anymore. I wasn't watching their downfall. I was simply choosing not to participate in their chaos. By early afternoon, I signed up for a real estate licensing course. I'd been considering it for a while, a quiet dream I never had room for before. I figured if I could navigate legal documents and asset severance like I had this year, I could help others do the same. In fact, I started sketching plans for a nonprofit, one that would help women, especially those dealing with family financial abuse, understand their rights and reclaim their futures. The name came easily. Unwritten Her, because so many of us had been written out of our own stories. At a coffee shop near the course center, I met a woman who recognized me from my Facebook post. You're Octavia, right? She asked gently. I nodded. I just wanted to say, what you wrote, it helped me leave a situation I didn't even realize I was stuck in. She didn't say much else. She didn't have to. Sometimes it's not about shouting your truth. It's about someone whispering back, me too. That evening, I took my usual walk down to the lakeshore. The path was quiet, save for the sound of ice shifting beneath the dock and a few ducks gliding silently along the water. I didn't bring anything with me this time. No letters, no evidence folders, no need for closure. I didn't need to say goodbye again. That had already been done. I just walked, not away from something, but toward whatever came next. And this time, I didn't flinch when the wind hit my face. This time, I didn't look back. Because some stories don't end with apologies. They end when the person who was written out rewrites everything, in her own name. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals come from the people sitting closest to us at the dinner table. This story wasn't just about a toxic Christmas. It was about reclaiming power after years of being quietly erased. Have you ever had to walk away from family to protect your peace? Let us know in the comments. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We have more powerful, true-life stories coming your way.